So most entrepreneurs, when we start a business, the idea is that someday we'll sell the business. And the question is, well, how do we get it ready for sale? And then sometimes a bigger question is, what do we do after we sell the business? Because as entrepreneurs, we don't really like to retire. So what are we going to do next? And today we actually have a good friend of mine, Greg Jaggers, who actually has been through this evolution. And I wanted to get his story here on the Wealthability Show about what he went through and what he's going through now in his new life, his new iteration, and how that all evolved, just so we get a practical example of it. So, Greg, really appreciate you taking time out from your busy schedule on the ranch to join us today.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to it.
So if you would, give us a little of your background of your business and kind of how you built it and then how you came to decide to sell it.
Sure. It kind of, you go way back to school where I was not that great of a student. I wasn't necessarily programmed for a college track. I think most teachers around me would go, "Oh, we're not sure where this guy's going to wind up. There could be a cement place or a place with a shovel in his hand, maybe." So anyway, so that's the earliest backgrounds. I wasn't cut from the exact academic profile that you would need to be academically super successful, but I love learning, and I've made great mentors along the way. But I started at a very young age in, what probably now is most clearly considered, a subset of behavioral health services, which would be special education. And I started working in what were called non-public schools in the California area. And that essentially is a private school that, all school districts across the country, due to federal IDEA, are required to provide their students a free and appropriate education. It's called FAPE. So a lot of times kids have such severe mental health or behavioral issues that, again, the school district is designed to meet the needs of the 90%, right? And so when kids fall out of that bucket, they need a place to go, and they would often, the most difficult kids, contract out their services to a private company. And so I started in that arena, like I said, at a very young age, and worked my way through different aspects of operations in that program, directly working with kids, and then migrating to the business side 7 to 10 years in, and really started to get an interest in the business side of it overall. And then I moved more into behavioral health with running programs for kids at a vice president level and then a CEO level. And then around 2004, I, had built a significant enough knowledge in the space. I was approached and actually went to work with a public company doing M&A, mergers and acquisition work in behavioral health care across the country. And we did that. We did that for quite some time, throughout the United States and Canada and some other spots. And early 2008, I remember coming home and telling my wife, "Hey, we better get something to do, or this work is going to be dried up and I'll be unemployed." And that was, of course, the early ripples of the debt market and everything imploding. And so somehow I came up with the bright idea that we should buy a business, which was a non-public school where I started my career, some 10, 15 years before. So we did that, and we started with a single program that was, I don't know, I think it was about 60 kids, about 30 staff when we started in 2008. And, there was, of course, it was a tarnished asset, you would call it, right? It was not, it didn't have a great reputation. It wasn't looked upon well, but, by that time, both myself and my wife had a pretty good reputation in the region, and being involved in services at other locations. So we were able to leverage that and start moving. And it was really, it was just something I knew. What really got me, it's interesting. We were doing the transaction. I had an attorney, and he's like, it was fairly difficult. And he's like, "Are you sure you want to buy this thing? This seems like a nightmare." And I said, "Trust me, it's gonna be okay." And he remained our general counsel up until his retirement a few years ago. And he said, "Yeah, it turned out okay." So we we started really, it's kind of the old. I think it's Warren Buffett that says, be aggressive when everyone's scared, right? And essentially, and when everyone's being aggressive, maybe you should be more cautious. And so that was really my interpretation of things. When things were tight, expand. And we really rode through that recession that was probably for the first time ever hit public schools pretty hard because public schools are funded via property taxes. And we, as you know, at that time period, we lost massive value in homes, and therefore we lost massive funding, and schools took cuts for successive years. And what I thought at the time was a real curse turned out to be a major blessing, which was we had the lowest daily rate to provide services in town. So what that meant during that really tight economic time is we grew significantly because we had a lower priced option than most people. And then we provided a higher quality service. So that really kind of put us on a path of meeting the needs of our customers and then really, accelerating our growth over the next, took about 15 years. I told my wife and a couple of our key employees, 5 years, this is going to be so big, you won't have to worry about it. And they visit that back on me because I verbalized it, to them. They visit back on me quite frequently at this point because it was a struggle. It was an entrepreneurial struggle, right? I mean, you're not really an entrepreneur until you've been sued the first time or the first 4 or 5 times. You learn all those lessons. I mean, there was literally a point at which, and I still have them, I showed them when we were in our process not too long ago. I had 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper turned sideways with Greg Jaggers' monthly projections of revenue. And I'm like, we're going to run out of cash right here in a year and a half. We are going to be dead bone dry. And they basically, my wife, who we've worked together since the beginning, looked at me and one of our key employees said, what are you going to do about that? So I set to work, and I actually, I had continued to do M&A consulting. And so I lined up a transaction, got a pretty significant success fee, and it went right into the business, right? Right at the right time. It just kind of sunk. Okay. And so really coming out of that recession, I actually said, can you feel the vibration? It's one of those things where you know things are going to explode. Like the top had been held on, people had been withholding delivering service. I mean, it was just, and it really exploded. And we went double-digit growth, like I'm talking 30-40% for probably 4 or 5 years, to the point at which we were outstripping our own. The great thing about that time period is we were able to use a lot of debt, right? We were debt financing because debt was cheap, right? And, I didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. So it was perfect. You use the business and we used debt and we grew and grew and grew and grew. But as you know, there's a point at which that whole scheme doesn't work because you get to the end of your rope as far as what they'll lend you. And you can actually burn yourself up, right, with too fast a growth if you can't manage the cash in and out. And that's one of the unique things about our business is it's a 45-day pay cycle. So you deliver the service and have the cost for a month, but the cash doesn't show up for 45 more days. So you're trailing behind, right? And it's a seasonal business that is closed for a month, in the summer, because we run on a school calendar. So 200 days, our business is built on 200 days. So, probably about 2014, 2016, we had added some services. We actually started to do pretty well and had good growth. I think I would say we probably were approaching that 10 million in revenue. And you start to get, you feel like you're a real business. Right. You're still really small, but you feel like I've really achieved. But you're doing 10 million in revenue and you're making maybe 7% margin. So the CEO sits you down, or the CFO sits you down and says, "Hey, we can't do it this way. Like this, something has to change." And I'm like, well, what's the problem? Well, we can't run on this kind of a margin. This is not going to work. And we're growing and we're consuming. So he basically sat me down and said, look, we need rate increases, which in our environment, it's public funding. So it's a tough position to be in. But I think it's around 2017, 2018 is where we got to that point where we were like, wow, we're not really viable, even though we're quite large. So we were able to, sit down, negotiate new rates, and really, put us on a firmer foundation. And then, of course, the great COVID happened, and there's a shockwave and massive ripple when they close schools. But kudos to all our folks and all the other educators in the world. They pivoted in a matter of days and figured out how they're going to deliver services remotely, in isolated groups, and all those kinds of things. And so we did that, and we continued to maintain. And I think in that time period, we had kind of really spread it out. We were doing pretty well. We were in the 20 million gross revenue range, I would say, somewhere in there. And then immediately following, COVID, again, another massive growth period where, things were trying to get back to normal, and, the great resignation, inflationary pressures on wages, so rates coming up and all those kinds of things. And we were really able to, at that point, I felt like we'd done a lot of our organic growth, and I wanted to do our first transaction. So I hunted down a small company that I thought would be a great opportunity for us. Of course, it was a tail end, and we decided we would, do a small amount of cash and a lot of debt financing to do that deal. And we had a bank identified, and our first bank backed out, like the last hour. And so then we got back and, put things back together. About 6-8 months later, found another lending opportunity, got it all together. All the numbers were proposed, got some great, got it, this part on a term loan, this part on, 1 year, all those great things. And we did that deal, and it was all great, except for, when you're doing your first kind of large transaction like that, as an entrepreneur, you don't know things you don't know. And when you don't ask for help, right, surprises show up. So we closed this. We bought a company. I think we spent somewhere north of, I don't know, it was multiple $1 million, somewhere over 5, I think, but it was under 10. And it was, a $1 million in EBITDA business, and we valued it a multiple of EBITDA, and we transacted, and, we got a certain amount of working capital in that transaction. And we also got, the cash coming through. Well, circling back to earlier, that 45-day pay window, we kind of missed that in our minds, because, now you're taking over their 50 employees and their, right, payroll, and and now you have debt service, right? And we went, oh, we don't have enough cash for this. And so I can clearly remember with my CEO, we called the bank and we said, hey guys, good news. Everything is going really well. We're about 30 days into our transaction, probably made our first payment after the deal had been closed. We called and said, Grace, everything's going great, and it looks good, and everything's exciting. The small problem here is going to be, there's not going to be enough cash for anything for about 45 days. And in fact, we could actually miss being able to pay our payroll. So what we're going to need you to do is let us overdraft on our line about $600K twice, maybe 3 times. But don't worry, guys, everything's going to be fine. And you know how that conversation
I'm sure they love that.
I can just tell you that I have never before gotten a call from my relationship manager at the bank saying, we're going to come out tomorrow, a few of us, and we would like to sit down and have a discussion. Okay, that sounds great. And who's coming? The president of the bank, the vice president of the bank, and this guy and that guy. I'm like, oh, okay. So we of course pulled all of our, our deck together to show them kind of what was going on and why there was no reason for concern. Yes, it was going to be a little bit of a pinch for us, but it was going to work out pretty quickly once we caught up to that billing cycle. And they listened, And, as you can imagine, those are one of those meetings where, looks a little tense. It looks a little uncomfortable around a table, sitting around that table. And we told them our story, and we told them why everything was fine, not to worry, and this was absolutely going to be fine. And that happened. Everything was great. Took about 2 cycles of overdrafting, and of course, they were able to, layer in some great fees for that ability, and I think they were happy. And we met our obligation, and we were exactly right. And about another 30 days after, when everything was clicking along, going really well, we got a call from our relationship manager, and maybe it was the president of the bank, I don't remember. And he said, I just want to tell you guys something. I really appreciate you being prepared for us to come out, knowing your business, being able to articulate what the issue was and what your response is. Because he said, essentially, without that, then you would have forced us to make decisions about your business and about protecting ourselves as the bank,
right,
of what we would have wanted to do. And he said, ultimately, we would have ruined everything. And that was his comment to me. We would have ruined it all there on the spot.
So this was during COVID or just after COVID?
That was just after. I mean, we did that just after.
Just
COVID.
After, but then how soon after that did you then sell the business?
So the reason I put that story in there for you is because that is what told me, okay, we are irresponsible operating at this point. We have 1,000 employees. You figure if each one of those employees is responsible for a family of 2, right? It was a consequential number, and we cut it close to the wire. And I'm like, this is not responsible. And we're gonna need a partner. We're gonna need a financial partner to continue this. I felt like there's plenty of opportunity, but we're at our limit. No bank was giving us more money, right? Everything was going great. There was no issue, but that was the moment for me. That's like, it's time.
Got it.
Like, we need to bring someone in. And I just happened to, through a connection in Wyoming, get introduced to an investment bank on the East Coast, and they came out and talked to us, and we started doing some work together and kind of getting ready to roll out the marketplace. And they took us out early 22, I think. That was Covington and Associates. I mean, they were magnificent to work with, and they took us out and, built the sim and built all of our stuff together. And we dropped that out into the world, and we had such an amazing, I think we had over 140 interested parties. And I think that really is based on who the payer is, right? We use a government payer.
Right.
And the service is a nationwide service, which makes it always an interesting opportunity for people to go, oh, we could grow that. And so we transacted in July of 22 with a private equity firm that was friends and had founded just over COVID, during COVID. So they had a big raise, and they were just barely coming out of the gate as well. And we're now 2 years in with them. I think in the time that we have been together, we've quadrupled the size of the company. So we're now in 10 states and doing.
So how involved did you stay in the business? Because part of this, as I understand it, was you were taking some money off the table as well.
Yes,
and
yes,
so
yes,
they,
yes. So
they clearly they don't come in and say, hey, we're just going to give you money. They want equity, but they want you to grow the business, right?
Well, here is more of the lesson, right? Our thought was, hey, yeah, we'll take some money off the table. We won't have to work. Everything's going to be good. And they're like, yeah, no, we wouldn't do this deal unless you guys are going to stay and run the company, right? So we rolled over a good portion of our proceeds and actually wound up owning, I think, 30% of the new company that got created.
And I think that's pretty typical. I've seen that several times where the remaining owner ends up owning the original owner ends up owning about 30%.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common formula. And I think, you have to remember that when you're starting to go out into the world and you're building a business, your goal, if you think you want to go through the private equity route, let's say, I mean, you're looking at needing to be at least about a 30 million in revenue and a 5 to plus million EBITDA operation for them to look at you like a platform. And so, that's kind of, where we were headed, and we were very close. And of course, we had really great data on where we would be in the next 12 months, which was even larger and more appealing. So I think that made life easy. We really cut down to about 6 or 8 really interested parties. And then it's, for lack of a better term, it's speed dating with investment bankers and
Right.
private equity folks. And, I think there's good people in the industry. I think right now it's taken some knocks. If you've been paying attention, there's bills being passed in different states about private equity's investment in healthcare. And I think, there are people that want to deliver a quality of service, and expand and build good business and build good return for investors, and not, do things we shouldn't do. And, one of the things as an entrepreneur you have to look at if you're going to partner in this path definitely is how much debt people want to use when they come in your door to do a transaction, right? Because that's crucial. Because if, in history's past, there's been situations where they use heavy debt because it's cheap. Well, you take a bad economy, you take some kind of black swan event that no one really saw coming, and you could wipe out a legacy business pretty easily if you've not been mindful of how you structured a deal going forward. So,
well, and in addition, it seems like, and I've seen this, of course, with clients over the years that have exited, that not all private equity groups are created equal. Let's say that,
no, for sure not.
Some are great to work with, and some just say, you know what, we got this, and we're not going to listen to you. It sounds to me like these people are actually listening to you, and they're actually
they're
paying
really
attention.
lucky.
So
Fantastic partners, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So how much time are you now involved in the business?
Well, so there's 3 of us, and there's my wife and our COO, who, we've been obviously my wife and I started the business. We have a good day-to-day operator. So we're basically the executive management, and it's, we just got back last night from Sacramento, where our corporate offices are, and we spent a couple days there. And we're working on initiatives, and we're doing a lot of M&A. Like I said, I think earlier, since we transacted in 22, we quadrupled the size of the company. So it's 4 times bigger than when we did our transaction, probably. And so it's a fast pace, and it's moving quick.
And yet still you've decided to take on a new business, and not just any new business, one that involves livestock.
Yeah. Well, there's something about surrounding yourself with a beautiful place, and then, having a business that there's very few talking people. Livestock don't talk a lot, right? They don't have much to say, and that is very relaxing to a certain extent. There's no big meetings with them.
So what made you decide? What made you decide? I mean, you were obviously, one of the things you have to do when you sell your business, or have sell a portion of it, is you've got to deploy that money. You've got to do something with that money. Yeah. What made you decide to do ranching, and particularly cattle?
Well, it first came out of love of the outdoors, and then I was like, I had relocated. My wife and I had relocated prior to COVID to, Wyoming, which is unbelievably gorgeous, and I really wanted, the opportunity to have a ranch there. And when we transacted, that was high on my priority list. And because of the mentors and the folks I've hung around, it's like, well, that's just a toy. What are you going to do with the toy, right? And there's a little bit more to it than that here in Wyoming. If you avail yourself of being a resident of Wyoming, or taking advantage of the estate laws here, it was definitely a vehicle to, move to future generations some money that, was always in the ground, to, more transportable, and not sitting in a bank worrying about what's going on with the economy. So that was definitely also a factor. But then when you have the land, then it's like, okay, there's a certain amount of cost to it. right? You need maintenance. There's just expenses when you
Well,
have
and
land
it's
and you
a
have
it's a
equipment.
pretty high risk business. I mean, I've
It
had many
is.
clients that are in ranching or farming. Most of them are pretty much gamblers at heart, because you
That's
have to
true.
be, because you're dealing with weather, pestilence,
Yeah.
things you can't control. I mean, black swan events like come every other year in
Yes,
agriculture.
that's true. That's true. That's true. So the next part of my thing was, okay, I don't want to be reaching in my pocket all the time to cover expenses at the ranch. I need a business that's going to produce there. And I thought, oh, well, cattle has to be the right business because we get some tax benefits there. We get the opportunity to build and have a commodity, and all that would be great. And then I thought, well, just cattle's not very exciting. I mean, you get a black cow, a brown cow, or whatever cow it is, that's not very exciting. And I also thought about health, and okay, well, really the advice out there is don't eat a lot of red meat. But if you're going to eat red meat, maybe you want the best you could put your hands on for the red meat you are going to have. And so that led me down the path of Red Wagyu, Japanese Akushi cattle. And what we have out here is really a feed stock. It's two bulls came in the United States in the 70s. Some more came in the 80s, and then Japan really declared them a cultural, magnificence and blocked any more importation or exportation, I should say, from Japan. So the stock that got here through those couple of importations is all there is. And so we're really running Japanese Wagyu, and it's a feat of science because there's so much. You have, basically everything's descended from about 7 bulls that came into the United States
Really?
in the red Wagyu side, and that's what we do out here at the ranch.
Well, I can say, having being a customer, that it is delicious. I
Not
actually
bad.
we actually had sirloin steaks the other day, and it was unbelievable. So
Yeah,
it's
no, it's pretty fun.
there's a lot of reward there, I know, and of course I'm sure you get a lot of satisfaction because your customers are going, wow, this is spectacular
Yeah.
product. But how are you balancing the two? Because this is a bit of a balancing act. You're still involved in the business,
Yep.
the old business. You have to be involved.
Yep.
And I am also curious, how long do you have to be involved, or is that an open-ended question?
Well, I think that the things I do now is work more closely on the M&A opportunities that we have, and meet some of those new entrepreneurs that we're looking to bring into the fold. And so that's more specific work, and then just provide some background to support to the rest of the executive team. And so it's a little less than before. But the flip side here is, this is an expanding. You're new, right? You're the new guy on the block. There's some very large and noticeable brands, and of course, in true entrepreneur fashion, and like you said, gambler. A lot of us, about here 2 weeks ago, I just acquired one of the 5 really well-known brands in the
Of
business
course you did.
called Cherokee, and a gentleman out there that has run one of the greatest seed stock programs I think's around. We acquired all his cattle and his stock in the last couple of weeks, and that of course sent a ripple through the whole cattle industry as far as where did these guys come from? So, just kind of disrupt wherever you go is the theory, I guess.
So any advice for business owners who are either, I mean, I've heard some good things. First of all, if you're really looking at serious private equity from somebody who's going to give you a high multiple, you're looking at $30 million of revenue and $5 million
Yeah.
of earnings,
Yep.
of basically cash flow earnings, EBITDA. And so I think that's really important. What I also heard was that you had a good executive team, so it was running without you. That to me, that would be a very important part, because they don't want you running it. And you don't want to be running it because you're no longer in control of it. But
Yes.
instead, you're expanding it, which is where your heart was in the first place, clearly.
Yeah, that's true.
And any other advice for entrepreneurs who either thinking about selling or getting, or say they've got maybe 2 to 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think, there's several things like, and I think, the place you and I both come from and the circles we've run in, your team matters, right? And if you're an entrepreneur, and, we like to talk about, some of the add-on acquisitions we do in that 8 to 10 to 12 million in revenue range. Those are entrepreneurs who've done really well. But sometimes the next step for them is you need a $300,000 a year finance person. You need an ops person. You need some business development. I would say the biggest thing, and I am guilty of this myself, is early on, finance. It's one of those environments where they're high dollar for high quality. And, once you get to a certain place where you need to be doing, projections, budgets, really, really drilling down and understanding the analytics of your business, you need a good finance person. You always need a good lawyer or two, depending on your industry, right? You need a general counsel who can then direct you, say, no, we need this guy for this, and we need that guy to that. I mean, that's always really big. And I would also say that, one of the things I have learned, and I think it's real important, if you're at that platform size, that 30 or bigger and 5 or bigger, and you are thinking you're going to go out, I think it's different. It's a new team. You need a new team, right? And you probably need an investment bank, that's going to assist you and speak the speak of the people that are come knocking, because it's a different world, right? I think as entrepreneurs, we get intrigued by business, and I'm always that way. I'm intrigued by all kinds of business. My wife got upset not too long ago because we were out to dinner and I was gone, and it was a restaurant that we frequented, and I was gone. She's like, "Where the heck did you go?" I said, "Well, I was asking him. I was trying to understand table turn and what is he monitoring, because he's looking at it."
Of course,
and
you were.
He literally, this manager literally took me in the back and said, "Look, we redid this kitchen to move food faster." And so he was really teaching me some of the analytics he had. And I was like, this is amazing. So you're intrigued about business, right? But I would say that you have to also understand private equity is a business as well. It's its own business, right? And it is unique. And so that's where you do have to understand that business is not the same as the business you're running. Those traditionally are not operators. They're finance people. And I like to call it PE math. They use some great formulas and different things and run rates and all kinds of things that entrepreneurs get exposed to that you haven't. But they have a business, and their business is creating value and legacy and taking care of shareholders, right? And their whole business is built around delivering a return.
I think that's a really good comment, that it is PE math.
Yes.
And that's not phys ed. That is private equity, just to be clear. But, and I talk to a lot of private equity people, both as as the CPA on the seller side, typically, as well as just knowing private equity people. And it is different. They're looking at it very differently. And I think that's a really good point that you're making, Greg, that you've got to look at it from the buyer's eyes, right? Because I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we're looking at it from our eyes, because a lot of it is, what's it worth to us, right?
That's right.
But that's not the question. The question is, what's it worth to them? Now, when you find a good situation, it's when what it's worth to us is not that far off what it's worth to them.
That's right.
Right.
And you have a partner that, I mean, you won't really, as an entrepreneur going through this for the first time, and I'm talking to younger people talking about, because I've talked to a lot of, target companies for us.
Right.
And, some of these people are younger, and I'm like, you're at a point, you've grown this large enough, it's time for you to take some risk off the table, right? Because it is
Right.
about de-risking, right? I mean,
Right.
but it's also about what is it you want to build? What do you want to see? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they do really well getting to a certain size, but when you're operating a 12, 6 million, 12 million, $20 million company, it's much different than a $150 million company.
It is. And the
And
finance is much different. Then you do need the finance people because that's a whole different animal.
well, the caliber of people you're talking to when you're talking about, acquisition credit lines and operation lines and all those different elements that come together when you're scaling up your baby. And I think that's the other thing for entrepreneurs. You love this thing
Right.
that you've created, but it's very much the same as sending your kid out the door to college. You pack them up and dump them off and hope they do okay. And you have your emotional feelings, and you really have to be able to set those feelings aside and understand you've ascended to a different level, right? You're now working with people that are in a whole different place and have a different business than your business. Yes, are they interested in your business? Do they love your business? Yes, but they love it for what they can build.
Right.
What it brings to the table as far as their ability to debt finance and spool up and create a nationwide or international entity. And it's not good or bad, but it's different. And as an entrepreneur, you have to understand they're not looking to be your buddy and hang out with you and help you build your business. I said this in multiple occasions when we were having our meetings with various PE firms. I think there is sometimes you'll see in transactions where the transaction happens, okay, and then everybody's kind of spending their time figuring out how we're going to work together. And for us, one of the key focuses for me is it's not, we can't really, we have to like each other enough to say, let's do this, because we really need to move expeditiously now. The market is right. The business line is super hot. We have to move, right? So we don't have a lot of time. And I said very quickly, we need to do 4, add-ons a year. And you say that in some certain, people they'll freak out. And the folks we were with went, yeah, that's probably right. We do need to do that. And we've held that pace, right? I mean, we've been doing a minimum of 4, add-on, as well as focus on your organic growth. So it's supercharging your business, but also getting some perspectives you've never had. Like the team is a different team, right? You're adding to your team. You need your team to get to that next layer with those folks, and then they become part of your team, and they bring different skill sets to the table. And a lot of times, some of these guys, they've done it. They've taken the 40 million to 500 million in revenue, and they know what that looks like, and you don't. And you might think you do. I think that's always the one thing about entrepreneurs, and I was guilty of this as a young guy because I worked for people. It's like, well, the old man's lost his mind. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, that's just because you haven't sat in that seat before.
Right.
Did you say that?
Right. No,
you think that seat change is not that big a deal, but when you're the employee and you jump to the owner entrepreneur, it's a whole different change. There's a lot that comes with it.
It's a different world. And I'm sure it's a completely different world when you jump into, now I'm part of the expansion team as opposed to part of the building team, which is a whole different animal. So, Greg Jaggers, give us how to find your ranch and the name of the ranch, etc.
Okay, so our cattle operation is J&H Livestock. So we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and our website, of course. We sell meat direct. We have all the, like I said, the bells and whistles of some of the highest end bred genetics that there are floating around. And we're located in the shadow of the Wind River Range in Big Piney, Wyoming. So yeah, take a look. Should be
well, I can, as a customer, I can personally say, everybody check it out. For sure. But thanks, Greg, for being with us. Thanks everybody for listening. Just remember that, most people listening, watching are business owners. And when we understand what it takes to build a business that can be sold, and then what it takes to sell that business, then we're actually looking towards not just how do we maintain operations now, how do we make more money, pay less tax now, but actually how are we going to exit with more money, less tax. And if you just for everybody, you like this show, please, click like, of course, and subscribe to the Wealthability Show, the YouTube channel. We're just so happy to be able to share. This is such a great conversation, Greg. It's we've known each other for many years, and just great to hear the story and the success and just some of the wisdom that comes from having done it. So thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Wealthability Show.
Thank you.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.